The Life and Explorations of David Livingstone. A work of standard authority among scholars says that Africa is the division of the world which is the most interesting and about which we know the least. Its very name is a mystery. No one can more than approximately calculate its vast extent. Even those who have studied the problem the most carefully disagree among themselves as to the number of its population, some placing it as low as 60 million, others much in excess of 100 million souls. It is superficial configuration in many portions is only guessed at. The sources of its mightiest river are unknown. The heats, deserts, wild beasts, venomous reptiles, and savage tribes of this great continent have raised the only barrier against the spirit of discovery and progress, elsewhere irrepressible, of the age, and no small proportion of Africa is today as much a terra incognita as when the father of history wrote. Many of its inhabitants are among the most barbarous and depraved of all the people of the world. But in ancient times, some of its races were the leaders of all men in civilization and were unquestionably possessed of mechanical arts and processes which have long been lost in the lapse of ages. They have vast cities, great and elaborate works of art, and were the most successful of agriculturalists. Noted for their skill in the management of practical affairs of life, they also managed and paid profound attention to the most abstruse questions of religion, and it was the people of Africa, the Egyptians, who first announced belief in the resurrection of the body and the immortality of the soul. Large numbers of mummies, still existing ages older than the Christian era, attest the earnestness of the ancient faith in dogmas which form an essential part of the creed of nearly every Christian sect. Attest the earnestness of the ancient faith in dogmas which form an essential part of every creed, of nearly every creed in every Christian sect. The most magnificent of women in the arts of coterie and voluptuous love belongs to this continent, of which so much still exists in darkness. The art of war was here cultivated to the greatest perfection, and it was before the army of an African general that the Roman legions went down at Cannae, and by whom the empire came near being completely ruined. Indeed, it may with much show of argument be claimed that the continent, over so much of which ignorance and superstition and beasts of prey now hold thorough sway, was originally the cradle of art, civilization, and human progress. But if the northern portion of the continent of Africa was in the remote past the abode of learning and of the useful arts, it is certain that during recent periods other portions of the continent, separated from this by a vast expanse of desert waste, have supplied the world with the most lamentable examples of human misery and the most hideous instances of crime. Nor did cupidity and rapacity confine themselves in the long years of African spoliation to ordinary robbers and buccaneers. Christian nations took part in the horrid work, and we have the authority of accredited history for the statement that Elizabeth of England was a smuggler and a slave trader. Thus, Africa presents the interesting anomaly of having been the home of ancient civilization, the prey of the modern rapacity and plunder of all nations, and its natural, therefore, It is natural, therefore, that in regard to the plundered portions of this devoted continent, the world at large should know but little. It is also natural that with the advancement of the cause of scientific knowledge, humanity, genuine Christianity, and for discovery, this vast territory should receive the attention of good and studious men and moral nationalities. Accordingly, we find that during a comparatively recent period, Africa has become a great field of scientific explorations and missionary labor, as well as of colonization. The first people to give special and continued attention to discoveries in Africa were the Portuguese. During the 15th century, noted for the great advance made in geographical discoveries, the Kingdom of Portugal perhaps was the greatest maritime power of Christendom. Her sovereigns greatly encouraged, and many of their most illustrious subjects practically engaged in voyages of discovery. They were preeminently successful both in eastern and western hemispheres, and one of the results of their daring enterprise is the remarkable fact that Portuguese colonies are much more powerful and wealthy today than their parent kingdom. The child is father of the man. The Portuguese sent many exploring expeditions along the coast of Africa, and in the course of the century they had circumnavigated the continent and planted colonies all along the shores of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. Bartholomew Diaz, having discovered the Cape of Good Hope, the reigning sovereign of Portugal, determined to prosecute the explorations still further, with the object of discovering a passage to India. This discovery was made by the intrepid and illustrious mariner Vasco da Gama, November 20, 1497, a little more than 5 years after the discovery of America. He pursued his voyage along the eastern coast of Africa, discovering Natal, Mozambique, a number of islands, and finding people in a high stage of commercial advancement with well-built cities, ports, mosques, for the worship of Allah according to the Mohammedan faith, and carrying on a considerable trade with India and the Spice Islands. Of this trade, Portugal long retained supremacy. Other European powers also meantime established colonies at different places on the African coast, so that in the 16th century a considerable portion of the outer shell, so to say, had been examined. The vast interior, however, long remained unexplored, and much of it remains an utterly unknown primeval wilderness to this day. The settlements and colonies of the Portuguese, French, Dutch, English were for commercial purposes only and added very little to the general stock of information.